You must have heard of John 3:16 and that Jesus saved people from their sins. And Howard, I'm not sure you would deny that somewhere in the depths of your childhood you might have heard that, but you're talking about a fairly complete theology. Am I understanding the disconnect correctly?
Yeah, I think you're saying it very well.
Hammett, how about responding to that point?
I'm not exactly sure what a complete theology means. I think if you asked me, if for whatever reason, I became a Christian, and you asked me all of a sudden, well, what does that mean that you're a Christian? I think I could give you a pretty complete idea of what that means just using common sense. I mean, using the messages of the Bible itself.
Let me take you up to speed. What we're talking about here is theology is a branch of philosophy, and when you go to seminary, you study theology usually and Bible and stuff like that, and at the completion of all this, you take systematic theology, which you have to put all of this philosophy together and make it all work in one tidy package, and it's something that people struggle over years to develop a good, strong, clear, systematic theology. So I don't think you really appreciate, the amount of effort and the amount of learning that it takes to do this, Okay?
Yeah. Okay. Well, perhaps we've done a good job with that topic, and that brings us pretty close to the end of our second segment. So this is Rick Davis.
This is Aaron Edwards.
And you're listening to The Things That Matter Most on AM 700 KSCB The Voice. And you are fortunate to be listening to one of our most interesting interviews with Howard Storm and Hemant Mehta, and we will be back in just a minute. Okay, we're back. This is Rick Davis.
This is Aaron Edwards.
And you're still listening to The Things That Matter Most, where we bring you a different spiritual viewpoint each week to help you decide for yourselves what you think is true and what is not about the most important questions of life. And if you've been listening, you have, I guess by definition, not turned the show off, and I certainly wouldn't turn it off either. We're in the midst of a very interesting and friendly, I might add, dialogue between Howard Storm, who is a man with an atheist past, who had a near-death experience that kind of changed his mind on spiritual things, and also a man that we've interviewed on the show before, and Hemant Mehta, who is a fairly well-known guy in atheist circles, a guy we consider a friend and who also has been on the show before, who still holds to his atheist views today. And Howard has been talking in this interview about his near-death experience, and we've been giving Hemant a chance to ask questions.
And it's actually been I'm enjoying just being a spectator because I'm loving to listen to this conversation.
Me too. Howard came back with a theology. There are pieces of his theology that he couldn't have learned before because
Correct.
They're not even the real Christian view today.
Well, they're not
the dominant Christian
They're not the
view.
dominant Christian view.
But yet these are in areas where if you go into Scripture and you study them, you find out they're debatable. In other words, they're not in an essential area. They're in an important area, but not an essential area. And there is a minority of people who do hold to these sort of alternative views.
One of the points that we're trying to say on this one is that if he was wanting to make a point and say, okay, now I'm a Christian and now I'm going to go along with everything that Christians believe, then there's a couple of issues that he probably wouldn't have thought up in order to go along with this. In other words,
right. It's just a stereotypical Christian image that he is now. I mean, he has some interesting thoughts that are even debated among Christians.
For example, having a chance on the other side. It is Hemant, you have never, and I frankly have never, talked to a Christian person that has said to you, oh, by the way, if you don't accept Christ in this life, there could be a chance on the other side. Now, when you dig into theology, you find out there are those who entertain that view, but it is distinct.
Heaven, you mean?
That Howard actually, to some degree or entirely, passed from this life and had a chance to respond to God on the other side, which is just I guess it wouldn't be considered heresy, but it's certainly a distinctly minority view.
And some Christians think it's heresy.
Right, and another minority view that some might view as heresy as well is something that Christians are taught from a very early age is if you don't believe this, and then if you go to hell and you're going to suffer for all eternity, and there's a lake of fire, and some people even take that as being literal, but for the rest of eternity you're going to suffer. Well, Howard experienced something different in talking to either Jesus or the angels that was saying that the lake of fire actually represents total annihilation. Correct me if I'm wrong, Howard. Is that basically what you're saying?
I'd be interested in seeing the exact passages and stuff that reflect what he's saying. It sounds like he had these experiences and then sought for confirmation from the Bible to what he saw, and I'm sure you could find a lot of things to confirm the thoughts.
Well, that's exactly probably what really did happen.
But let me tell you why I'm sticking to my story, and I'm not going to change it, okay?
Okay.
Like
all of us probably, right?
It's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
I have come to experience the reality of Jesus every day in my life. And I talk with Jesus, and he talks with me, and he does things. He makes things happen that are beyond any sort of rational explanation. Miraculous things happen in my life.
Like what?
Some people asked me in Central America to build them a church, and I said to God, I don't have the money to build a church. And the guy came up to me a couple weeks later and said, God told me to give you $20,000 in a dream. He has $20,000 so he can build a church. And I said, how'd you know? And he said, God told me in a dream. How about that? I had a guy who was dead in the hospital, and God said, go pray over this guy. And then when I left the room, he wasn't dead anymore, and he's alive today. How about that?
Well,
I can go on and on and on.
Hammond, go ahead.
I mean, these things make me go like, wow, I don't believe it. I was there, and I don't believe it.
It's a remarkable, remarkable coincidence. Then I don't think the guy was actually dead. Then if he was dead, he would not have resuscitated, so he was not dead.
Right.
I mean, there's a great saying, like, there are no such thing as miracles, just misdiagnoses. And I think that's a great case of that.
Okay. Well, let me take us back to our original premise of the show. I don't think we're going to persuade each other here today, but really the purpose of this dialogue is to let our listening audience hear these points of view from two guys who in their past shared the same spiritual point of view and who today have arrived in different places. And so I thank you, gentlemen, for the good job you're doing, and you're giving our listeners, I think, exactly what they want. Now,
yes.
Hammond, we promised you that we would give you a little bit of free time here to kind of just ask questions of Howard, so this would be a good time to do that.
You said you had the tormentors, the people who were taking you away at first were, like ripping off your flesh and stuff like that. I mean, were there marks left or anything like that, or was it just an idea? I mean, obviously you experienced it, but was there any physical evidence of that?
Afterwards? No.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I think I stepped out of this. I think I stepped out of this world and went into another reality, and then I was brought back in. The experience that happened to me would have taken place over a period of months or years, but in fact, it all happened in a moment.
In other words, Howard, are you saying when you stepped into eternity, it really only needed moments or minutes or whatever here in time and space, but you actually experienced something that, if you want to talk about time, even though you're talking about eternity, really took a whole lot longer than a few minutes?
Oh, yeah.
Is that your point?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Howard, let me ask you, what would have happened had you not prayed? When your voice said to you, pray to Jesus? What happens if you didn't pray?
I would be deeper and deeper in that place with my kindred spirits at that time of non-believers.
What would you
doing their party thing?
Right, but you would be dead then. You're claiming.
Yeah. So Hammond, I think what you're asking is, do we have so-called medical proof that he was clinically dead? And I think the answer is, in this story, where Howard would claim there's lots of pieces of evidence, that one piece of evidence is not present. There is not any... Go ahead.
Right, and I think that's a pretty significant piece of evidence, though, because if he's saying that he was out of this even for a moment, I mean, Howard's a professor. He knows as well as anyone that, one anecdote doesn't make a proof.
Sure.
Yeah, there's millions of anecdotes. These anecdotes have been going on. If you read Carol Zalewski's book on the history of near-death experiences, you'll find that these things have been going on even back before Christianity. Like Plato writes about it in the letter to Timaeus in Plato's Republic, 500 years before Christianity. These things go back in time. There have been near-death experiences. Millions of them, millions of them. So my anecdote is just one of millions of near-death experiences.
I want to leave room for a last question that we have, and we're down in just a few minutes. But before we do, I'd like to clarify one point in this dialogue. The word proof has come up here a few times.
Yeah.
And I would like to say this for the sake of our audience, but also for the sake of those of us involved in this dialogue, that I don't think, even from a biblical standpoint, that there is what we would call proof. I think we're talking about evidence. I think we're talking about the preponderance of the evidence. Now, for the individual person having a subjective experience, it could constitute proof, but Howard and Hammett